So we've talked about star names. We've talked about the proper names. This is what you normally think of when you think of a star's name. It is, hey, that star is named Vega. That star is named Polaris. That star is named Antares. So it's the name of the star. That's the cool thing. I remember a number of years ago, a friend of mine had taken a class, and he was out with some other friends, and they were pointing up and looking at stars, and he'd mentioned, oh yeah, that's the star Arcturus, and it really impressed all his friends. It's like, oh, you know the name of the star? And, yeah, okay. So that's the name here. The problem is that every culture has named stars, and they've all named them differently. So not everybody agreed on what the star names were. So that's why the IAU had to eventually, and it's only a few years ago, 2016, made the first official proper names of stars. And I think I mentioned in the previous lecture, I'm a little bit upset that some of my favorite proper names didn't make the list, because some of these stars had 2 or 3 well-used proper names, and in a couple cases they picked the ones that I like, and in a couple cases they picked the ones that I didn't like. But there are still a list of common names of stars out there, and so even though some of these stars have one official proper name, there are several other common names of the stars. By the way, should mention that you often hear about companies that sell star names and so forth. Those names are not recognized by the International Astronomical Union, and so those names are not used by professional astronomers. They'll stick with the proper names that already exist and are approved, and in many cases they don't even use those names. They instead use the Bayer designation. The Bayer designation is unambiguous. Johann Bayer, Greek letter plus constellation. Now the problem is the Greek alphabet runs out of letters at omega. Once you get down to omega, you're now out of Greek letters. And so what happens if you have more stars than are Greek letters in the alphabet? Because there are some constellations that don't have very many stars, and so at least not to the naked eye, and so by the time you get down to just a few stars, you've out of stars before you run out of letters. But other constellations are big with lots of visible stars, and so Bayer didn't worry about that, but later astronomers did. Astronomer named John Flamsteed, he was actually in charge of the Royal Observatory at Greenwich. He had a way of naming stars in which you have a constellation here, and he would name the stars essentially from right to left. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So an example of that would be the star 51 Pegasi. Now that's the star number 51 in the constellation Pegasus. Now, it's not like anybody that finds a new star just starts renumbering. It doesn't work that way. These are the ones he saw, and he labeled them. He published a catalog of stars. Now, he labeled all the stars he saw all the way down to the naked eye limit just about, and so that means stars that had Bayer designations now have Flamsteed numbers. So stars have multiple different kinds of names. Now, this was really good, but problem eventually arose that with telescopes you could see even dimmer stars, and some of them actually did interesting things that you wanted to label. So Frederick Argelander comes along, and he, at the Bonn Observatory, he publishes a catalog that we call the Bonner-Muckstrom, means the star catalog of Bonn. And he went through and he labeled all the stars that he saw. And basically the way that the star was designated was he pointed a telescope at a certain angle in the sky and had a starting point, and from that starting point over he counted stars, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so forth. So stars, that had Flamsteed numbers, they got a Bayer or a BD number. If they had Bayer designations, they also got a BD number. So a star name would look something like BD plus 36 degrees 2147. So that means Bonner-Muckstrom plus 36 degrees, meaning the telescope was up 36 degrees, from a reference point. We'll talk about that later. And that was star number 2147. Took decades to do this, and it was only half the sky, the northern half of the sky. So a number of years later, they created a complementary Cordoba-Durchmusterung, which was the southern sky. So at CD, the minus 45 degrees means the telescope was pointed 45 degrees below that reference, and star number 5223, at that angle. Early part of the 20th century, there's the Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory catalog. It's a multi-volume set. It's about three books of just star positions. And so an entry would look like SAO 101,227. There's also the the Harvard Revised Catalog, the Henry Draper Catalog, Hubble Guide Star Catalog, Tycho Catalog, Hipparchus Catalog, Yale Catalog. All kind of observatories and instruments had catalogs of star positions. And many of them overlap each other. Many of them were for specific types of stars and so forth. So those were different ways of naming stars. So all the stars in the sky have all those different kinds of names. So there's actually websites you can go to that you enter a star name, and it gives you all the several dozen other official names that the star has. Well, there are other things besides stars in the sky. And for example, there's little fuzzy things in the sky. And a French astronomer, Charles Messier, he was actually a comet hunter. He liked to look for comets, and comets in a small telescope look like small fuzzy things. They don't look like the big thing with a tail that you normally think of as a comet. But most comets, some do look like that, but most of them in the telescope look like a small fuzzy thing. Well, the sky was filled with small fuzzy things. And so he published a catalog of things that were fuzzy that were not comets, things that stayed put. And so to avoid confusion with comets. In the end, he had published a catalog, 1 through 109. He died, and then his accomplice, Pierre Messier, published an addendum, object number 110. So the catalog goes 1 to 110, except that unfortunately there's one duplication, so it's really only 109 objects. Now, some of these are the prettiest things in the sky. Messier number 31, we call that M31. That's the Spiral Nebula, or the Great Spiral Galaxy in Andromeda. Messier number 104, M104, is a really famous galaxy. We call this the Sombrero Galaxy. M57 is a cloud of expanding gas that we call the Ring Nebula. And Messier number 42 turns out to be a cloud of gas collapsing to form new stars. So there's all these interesting things that are in here. But of course, other than that one object that Messier added to his catalog after he died, he actually quit cataloging stuff after he died. And so other astronomers came along. We had William Herschel, and he came up with something called the General Catalog. Remember, William Herschel got the planet George named. So he, with his telescope that the king had built for him, when the king wasn't looking at the planet George, he was scanning the sky, looking for other things that were out there, and he found thousands of things that were not stars, little fuzzy patches in the sky, or clumps of stars, or whatever. And so he made a list of them all, and that's called the Herschel General Catalog. In the late 1800s, J.L.E. Dreyer, Jonathan Dreyer, comes along, and he produces what's called the New General Catalog, NGC. And so the NGC, so you'd have something NGC 7006 would be number 7006 in that catalog, which is actually a globular cluster that orbits around the rest of our galaxy. So now that included all the things that had Messier numbers, all the things that Herschel gave names to, and so forth. So they all had they had other sort of designations as well. 10,000 objects just about, and then new telescopes found another 10,000 objects, and he published addendums called the index catalog. So you might have something called IC something or other. So the Andromeda Galaxy is called the Andromeda Galaxy, proper name. Messier number 31 or M31 or NGC 227. It's got a whole bunch of other names too. We don't want to go into all those, but there are many different names that these kind of objects have. And so they're all cataloged. Okay, now the idea of naming stars and so forth, that goes parallel with some of the stuff that's in your chapters 1 and 2, but I go a little beyond that because I think it's kind of interesting how these names get there. But the next step that we want to talk about, and now we're back into what's there in chapter 2, and that is mapping the sky. So we want to figure out where things are in the sky. So that's going to be our next topic that we take up, is mapping the sky.